Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we are talking about the news out of the state of New York, where Republican Representative Elise Stefanik has officially announced her long anticipated bid for New York governor in 2026. Stefanik, the Republican from northern New York, is a close ally of President Donald Trump and is now officially challenging the Democratic governor, Kathy Hochul, in this race. Now, this is not much of a surprise, as this news has been anticipated for quite a while now, but the New York governor's race in 2026 is getting a lot of media attention, in large part due to how unexpectedly close the race ultimately was back in 2022, where in that governor election, Kathy Hochul defeated Republican Representative Lee Zeldin by a pretty small margin. You can see here in the map that she won by only 6.4% in the usually very blue state of New York. Now, it should be worth noting that 2022 was the midterm election during Joe Biden's term as president, so typically the party that's not in charge of the White House does well in a lot of these elections and usually benefits from that, so the Republicans probably did better in this election than 2026 would suggest, especially based on how 2025 just went. But nonetheless, Kathy Hochul's approval ratings were not very strong, and Lee Zeldin capitalized on that, plus the strong election environment, and made this race very competitive. Now for 2026, Elise Stefanik is running and hoping to keep a similar track record going. As for this race, on the Democratic side, Kathy Hochul is running again. She's also facing a primary challenge from Antonio Delgado, the lieutenant governor of New York. Now, how that primary plays out, the current polling data shows Kathy Hochul has a very strong chance at winning this. There's a lot of undecided vote or third-party vote at this current point in time, but it looks like Kathy Hochul, more likely than not, is going to win and be the Democratic nominee once again. On the Republican side of things, with Elise Stefanik in the race, she is now the first Republican officially in the race. It's worth noting the build-up to this that President Trump endorsed Representatives Mike Lawler and Bruce Blakeman, the Nassau County executive, for re-election in May, saying essentially to clear the field for Elise Stefanik in this race, as Stefanik is obviously a close ally of Trump. Now, Mike Lawler actually announced that he'll be running for re-election and not running for governor, so it definitely seemed to work on that regard. As for Bruce Blakeman, he just won re-election as Nassau County executive, but he's expressed interest in potentially running for governor in this race as well. Two other Republicans, Pat Hahn and David Tully, have filed paperwork to run, but as of right now, the only Republican in this race is Elise Stefanik, and based on the early primary polling, is likely going to be the Republican nominee. In the last poll done in June from Santa College, Stefanik had a massive, about 18-point lead, 19-point lead over Mike Lawler, who is obviously not running now, at 18%, and Bruce Blakeman had 7% with 39% undecided. Plus the endorsement of President Trump essentially locks the primary up for Elise Stefanik, which leads to the general election. Now, the general election overall is listed as likely Democrat across all major political prediction websites. Cook Politico, Inside Elections, Tableau Crystal Ball, and Race to the White House, they all have this race listed as likely for the Democrat, which using the rating scale is between a 5 and 15% Democratic win. Now, the polling on this race has been very interesting. The only poll that came out just a few days ago from Manhattan Institute, which is a Republican pollster, does show Elise Stefanik leading the race by 1 point. Though it is a Republican poll, and the general rule of thumb that I use is I usually shift the results of the poll 5 points in the opposite direction to account for the bias of the poll. So in that scenario, that 1 point lead for Stefanik will become about a 4 point lead for Hochul. But even taking that away, the margin of error is 3.3%, and other is 9%, with 6% undecided. In a Republican poll, we know Kathy Hochul on Election Day will get more than 42% in such a Democratic state in a Democratic midterm year. After 2025 was such a great night for the Democrats, probably not going to be the case that this is going to happen on that regard. The rest of the polls, however, have shown at times a competitive race and at times a not so competitive race. The last poll from Gray House, which is another Republican pollster, showed a 5-point race for Hochul versus Stefanik, with 9% still undecided. Now, in that one, again, that same 5-point rule would make it about a 10-point race. But Siena College's poll from September showed a much more of a bigger race for the Democrat. Kathy Hochul 52, Stefanik 27, still 17% undecided though. That could potentially be more representative of the New York electorate, though again, we know on election night, based on how Republicans have done in the past, Elise Stefanik will get more than 27% of the vote. So how I think this race shapes up right now is I don't think it's going to be as close as 2022 was for a lot of the factors I laid out at the start of the video. One of which being 2022 was a midterm election where the Republicans were poised to have a very good night and the Democrats were poised to not have a good night, whereas 2026, based on President Trump being the president, Republicans controlling the Senate, House, and it's more likely going to be a night the Democrats benefit. And we also just saw the 2025 elections for governor, where New Jersey voted roughly about almost 14 points. Now it was 13, now almost 14 points for Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, and Virginia, which voted for Abigail Spanberger by about 15 points or so over Winsome Sears, in two states that voted in 2024 for Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. They voted for Harris +6 in both of these states. Now in New York, it voted for Harris over Trump by 12.6%. The X factor in this race for 2022, in my opinion, is going to be Kathy Hochul herself and her approval ratings, where the last few years or so, Kathy Hochul's approval ratings have not been all that strong. Now, I do believe the most recent poll from Morning Consult does show she's no longer in the top 10 for most unpopular governors in New York and may even have a net positive approval rating. So it does seem her numbers are finally starting to go into the positive direction right before re-election in 2026, which is certainly a good sign for her. But that being said, despite in 2022 where her approval ratings were not all that strong, she still won re-election in a very good night for the Republicans by about 6.4%. So talking about 2026, can Elise Stefanik do a better job than Lee Zeldin at getting out the vote? And I personally don't think it's going to be that much of a difference between Stefanik and Zeldin. Maybe, if anything, Stefanik may do slightly worse. And a big reason being is the election environment that she'll be running in. She'll be running in New York, where, New York itself, obviously, very heavy at the New York City area, Bronx, Queens, Kings, New York, Manhattan. Upstate New York going to be more Republican, but to actually have a chance to win this race is going to be, I think, very contingent on a very strong election night for Republicans, and likely Kathy Hochul's approval ratings really being in the gutter, being Stefanik's only potential chance to victory. And if it couldn't be done in 2022, after what we just saw in the governor's races in 2025, I have a very hard time believing it's going to be the case in 2026. As for overall electability, Stefanik being a representative of upstate New York or northern New York, just to be clear here, Stefanik represents this district, New York 21. She may be able to do a little bit stronger in the upstate New York part, but she'll also be running in an election that's certainly going to be a lot more favorable for the Democrats, and being such a close ally of President Trump, which seemed to hurt Jack Ciattarelli in New Jersey, certainly could potentially play a role in this race as well. So how it ultimately goes on election night, I think there are about 5 governor's races right now that I would consider to be the main toss-ups of this election. I don't think New York is going to be one of them. For right now, I think New York also starts out in the likely Democratic category, which is in between a 5 and 15% margin of victory. Now, last time it was 6.4. I think this time we see this race go right around that 10-point margin of about 9.5% for Stefanik losing to Governor Kathy Hochul in New York. But obviously we'll have to cover this race over the next year or so, see how it all unfolds. But I think right now Kathy Hochul is the favorite to win re-election. Though Stefanik running, probably the most high-profile Republican in the state of New York to run against Kathy Hochul, and with the endorsement of President Trump, certainly doesn't hurt for the Republicans' chances, but it's going to be a Democratic state in a Democratic midterm year, certainly an uphill battle at this point in time. But that's all I have for you in today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned as I post a new video every single day in the latest election news and predictions for 2025 and now for 2026. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.